So I want to talk a little bit about tracking calories because this is something I often get people to do because I do want some short-term success as we first get started, and then learning some of the principles behind that as we're seeing some success by tracking. But I also want to sort of highlight it doesn't have to be as complicated as might expect. And I often say just start, just track, get in the habit of tracking. Once you're tracking, then start to become a little bit more accurate, start to learn from, start to analyze. But first I want you in the habit. And sometimes in just getting the habit, you haven't really learned some of the sort of nuances, the ins and outs of tracking. But I also want to make sure that this is not something that it becomes like all encompassing, it takes over your life and you're out to always have to worry about it. Like, I want you to live your life. I want you to use it as a tool to continue to get more out of life. So just like you wanted to go on a vacation, buy a new car, you can budget for it. But of course you couldn't buy 4 new cars this year. You can only buy 1 maybe, right? It's all about how much do you have to spend in terms of calories. Now, some of the common errors, I get into these sort of nitty gritty, these details only when necessary. For most people, just tracking keeps you cognizant, keeps you away from making the decisions that you might not have made if you weren't being held accountable. You also helps you to get a good sense of what your budget should be, the value of calories. You start to think, okay, maybe that's not worth it, right? So there's that whole behavioral side of things, and that's where I really want to get out of it. But again, maybe you're not seeing the results that you're expecting, and you feel like you're doing everything else. You're hitting all the other big rocks, as I've mentioned. So that's when I say, okay, let's hone in on how to get more accurate with tracking. But I only ever want to get here when we've already sort of got everything under control. Like, you're making sure you're doing everything else first. All that's going, okay, now I'll get it. Because I always ever want it to be as complicated as it needs to be and no more complicated, because your life is already complicated enough. And that being said, the more complicated this gets, the more likely that your goal is something more extreme and intense. So you might be wanting to get into a photo shoot, a bodybuilding competition, a track, something that gets you like in the top echelon of performance. But for most people, we just want to look good, feel good, and we want to function well. We don't need to get into this detail. But again, if you feel like you're doing the right tracking, you feel like you're doing everything else right, and you're still not seeing results, that's when I look at, okay, why don't we hone in and really get specific and minute and granular about what we're doing in terms of tracking. So some of the common mistakes. You're not measuring the grams, the ounces, all that stuff. That's when you maybe have to get out the food scale instead of just eyeballing it, right? And I think that even with that, you'll start to be able to go back to eyeballing at some point, but it's almost like a forensic audit that you want to make sure that you're getting the right grams, the right ounce, the right teaspoons, the right milliliters, whatever it is. Some people are not paying attention to some of those things, and that's why, they feel like they're under, but they're actually technically over. Along the same lines, like maybe you're not tracking the oil you're putting in your salad. Maybe you're not tracking the extra condiments you put on. Maybe you're not, the added sugar in your coffee, added milk. It's not really a big thing in the long term. Like, it's probably some minute amount of calories, maybe in terms of sugar and milk added to your coffee, but it adds up potentially, especially if you're doing that and you're also not tracking the amount of oil you're putting in your salad, and you're also not counting the ketchup and mustard you put on, and you're also not counting, the added pecans you put in your salad. So there's little things that you can add in that add up in calories, and are not so much on their own, but they do add up if you're not looking at some of those details. So again, don't have to be like very militant about it, but it might be something to look at if you're not seeing the results you're looking to get out of tracking. Maybe you're also not tracking your liquid calories. Maybe you're drinking things and you're just not tracking them. You're forgetting that you're drinking it and not putting it in there. That could be another thing. Maybe you're, throughout the day, you're grazing a little bit on that tray of cookies you've left on the counter. Maybe your kid just finished food and you're sort of just finishing up because they didn't eat it and you don't want to throw it out. Those little bites, those nibbles, those tastes of someone else's food, that lick of the ice cream that you bought for your kid. So there's a lot of these, like what we call them, the bites, the nibbles, the licks, the tastes, and the grazing. All that stuff can add up technically, especially if you're not seeing results. Again, these are minor details. Assuming you're looking at the big things, these might be those little things that add up to put you over the edge. And sometimes maybe you're not double checking the value. You're looking, you're typing something in let's put salad in, for example, and you see like a bunch of things with a bunch of different calories. That's because some people have inputted their own values, and some of them are like extreme, so like 700 calories for a salad and just a plain garden salad, and some of them it's like 100 or 5 calories, whatever, right? It's verify, double check, make sure that, you know, this looks right. And why would a large salad only be 1 calorie? That doesn't make sense. So don't use that one. There's a new function on MyFitnessPal where you can check off the green button where it verifies foods that have been verified. So they've actually made sure, okay, these salads are this many calories, or these bananas are tend to be this many calories, right? It's impossible to be 100% accurate, but be as accurate as possible. So we talked about things that you're missing in terms of tracking, you're forgetting to track. But what I want to do is also give you a game plan of what you should be doing. How do you get better? How do you get the best at tracking? I think if you're tracking something, try to overestimate as much as you can, not to be extreme, but to give yourself a little bit of a buffer just in case. You know, if there's 2 things you're not sure, try to go with the bigger, the heavier, more calorie-wise thing. I want you to use that tracker as a planning tool. Like when you're going to go out, look at the menu and pre-plan what you're going to have. If you know what you're having for breakfast tomorrow, why don't you just put it in now when you're having your dinner or when you're making your breakfast, right? When you're planning your week out of lunches, for example, when you're batch preparing, put them all in now. Don't leave till tomorrow what you can get done today. Of course, verify the calories, use that green check mark when possible. Scan the barcode of items to make sure that those are the calories and not just some random other brand of the same thing that might be more or less calories, right? So planning, use the barcode, verify, pre-plan, so pre-look at menus when you're going to have stuff, and then you can kind of work your day around that, right? So if you know that your dinner is going to be 900 calories, you know that you have X amount of calories left for the breakfast and lunch, and you can almost plan for it accordingly. You can pre-track days in the past, and when you have to, try to overcompensate and say that the calories are worth a little bit more rather than underestimate, just to be a little bit more on the safe side. So those are some common food tracking errors and some suggestions I have to move forward. And I'm going to really circle back and say this one more time. It's not about being little minutia militant with your tracking. That's not the idea. You only have to be that strict if you have a really strict goal. If you're just trying to lose weight, be patient and take the you only live once routine. Use the 80-20 principle and get there over time. There's no rush for it. But again, the more aggressive your goal is, the more aggressive you have to be with the tracking. Again, most people are not going to have to be there. But if you feel like you've done everything else, then this is a good thing to sort of hone in on and see what might be the excess in terms of calories.